see it to believe it.
Efficiency.
He was raised by a military.
He was raised by a military guy. Yeah, he's eating to survive, I guess.
I would say he does everything the same way.
Yes. No, it's everything in life is in your face, really loud, 100%. 100 miles an hour. And by the way, that voice you hear when he's screaming at you in class,
That's his normal.
that's his normal voice. I've ridden in a car with him from Texas to Washington, D.C., to Louisiana, to Mississippi. Oh my God.
We ever asked him, we got quiet, get quiet down a little bit.
He doesn't think he's loud. I tell him every semester, I'm like, being damn, dude. I'm in my office and I can take notes on your lectures. So you're yelling at him. He's like, oh my God.
You really can.
I had a
I'm terrified
roommate
to
who had him, and she was like, we sit in this class, and all he does is yell. I'm like, no, he's not yelling.
That's
He's
just
just
how he
talking.
talks.
He's just talking. He's not yelling.
It's just how he talks.
Did you ever put those side state yells?
Exactly.
I've told him, because at North Texas, we taught these huge theaters. And we intentionally didn't wear a microphone, because if you wear a microphone, they all wrestle around. If you don't wear a microphone, they'll sit still. Everybody can hear you. And I told him when he first got up here, because I came here one year and then he was hired the next year. I said, you're not teaching 150 anymore, you're teaching like 25 people. They can hear you. I'm not yelling. All right, man. We used to be neighbors too. I'm saying, our houses run next to each other. I was trying to sit in my house and watch football, and I can hear him talking outside. I used to yell at him through the window, "Bean, shut up!" Just, yeah. So it's as bad as it sounds. Yeah. Those are the clean ones, I can tell you. I've got other stories. Can't tell you those. All right. Let's see how far we can get today. Oh, these are graded. I'll give them all back at the end. Both of them are in there. So. Obviously, the main thing we're going to cover the rest of the semester is the 1850s, of course. Fire eaters and all the coming of the war and all that. But we got to get there first. So there's kind of a little period of transition. Basically, the era of the Mexican War up to about the Compromise of 1850 or just thereafter. So I like to kind of break it apart so you don't have this super long thing on just the 50s. Let's set it up here. Then we'll cover an election that most classes skip. And then if we have time, there's a convention of Southerners that nobody ever talks about that I want to include. If we don't have time, we'll get it next time. But let's start with the big picture. So 46, of course, is the year of the Mexican War, 46 to 48. Debate over slavery in the territories. Let's start. Logical place there, number one. The big picture, we've already talked about this a bunch, but here's kind of the jumping off point. In the big picture, as you know, the slavery debates have evolved. We are now at the point where the moral issue is the main issue, almost the only issue. So it's no longer really about seats in the Senate or money or international perceptions. Slavery is wrong to some people and it's perfectly right to other people. And so you have to pick a side. As I've said before, I know I'm repeating myself, but we have to kind of say this again to set up the section. Now that it's a moral issue, it's going to be much more difficult to compromise. With Missouri, they drew a line on the map. That won't fly this time. It won't work. It won't work for any number of reasons. But as I've said a million times in here, in politics, compromise is almost always the right thing to do. Almost always. It's not always the right thing to do. It's almost always the right thing to do. But of course, the very definition of compromise means you have to give a little ground. You have to give your opponents a little bit of credit. That's how adults function in life. That's how politics works. But it can't really work that way on a moral question. Because by definition, if you compromise, then you're giving ground and you're acknowledging at least some validity to your opponent's argument. And if it's just a basic political issue, a tax question or something, you could do that. But it's a moral question. Once or twice in your life, you have to just kind of draw the line in the sand and say, no, we can't agree this time. I think that's what we're talking about here. Now, to be clear, the territories in question, of course, would be what would become the Mexican section. That's what we say, will there be slavery in the new territories? That's what we're talking about, the Mexican section. The land gained from the Mexican War. Okay, so let's start right there at number 2. You have Let's look at the various proposals for how to answer this question. As I kind of alluded to earlier, just a couple seconds ago, can you just extend the 3630 line? Believe it or not, there were a few guys who advocated that. We're going to come back to this idea here in a minute. But again, very few people around the country are willing to take that seriously for any number of reasons. It doesn't solve anything. Also, drawing a line on the map again, whichever side you're on, that at least indirectly lends a certain amount of credence to your opponent. Right? So almost no one takes that seriously. Now, it's not a dead letter. There's going to be those who propose it. But as a true solution on a national scale, it's not really taken very seriously. Instead, we have three choices. Now, I'm going to give it the basics here, but I'm also going to go in a little bit more detail than you would get in an intro kind of course, because this is important. In the super big picture, what you have won't surprise you. You have basically a northern view, a southern view, and a compromise kind of middle of the road. That won't surprise you. But let's look at each one carefully. Let's start with the Wilmot Proviso. Again, the question is, can slavery go to the Mexicans? Proposal number one is the Wilmot Proviso. This you might call the northern view, for lack of a better way to put it. It's proposed by a member of Congress. He's from Pennsylvania. His name is David Wilmot. This is basically all he's known for. David Wilmot, Wilmot Proviso. What the Proviso said is, he said there should be no slavery in any land gained as a result of the Mexican War. There should be no slavery in any land gained as a result of the Mexican War. Now, interesting thing about this proposal. This was proposed in 1846, not in 48. In other words, it's not proposed after the war, it's proposed at the very beginning of the war. Does that suggest anything?
Everyone knew they were going to win the war.
They knew they were going to win the war, and they knew they were going to take a lot of territory. The war's barely begun, and they're already talking about, can slavery go to the land we're about to take? This actually came up during, they were discussing a bill for how to finance the war. So they will not threw this in there. It did not pass, obviously it didn't pass. It passed, but the lecture will be almost over. It did not pass. There was some support for it in the North at first, outrage in the South. But now what we can say is eventually, as you get into the 1850s, this kind of became the majority northern view. That's a safe statement. It became what most northern people advocated.
What's the Wilmot Proviso?
Wilmot Proviso, yeah.
That's right.
Don't assume that they're any more radical than that. We're not talking about, oh my God, we must stand up and crush slavery. Most people aren't saying that. They're just saying it shouldn't go to the new territories. Really not a very radical or provocative position. Right, so it's proposed as this northern view to keep slavery out of the territories. It takes time to garner support in the North, but eventually it's kind of the average North. A lot of outrage about it in the South, though. And yeah, okay, because of slavery, but it's not just slavery. There's something else to it here. If this were to pass, it's not just that it would keep slavery out of the territories. It would also set the precedent that the federal government is now in the business of judging the morality of slavery. Because everybody knows why it's being proposed. We're deep into stage 2. It's a moral question on both sides. If the federal government were to pass this law proposed by people, in this case, who are trying to keep slavery out of territories for moral reasons, then that means the federal government has now taken a stance. Well, there's one thing, it's one thing for Americans to disagree with each other. It's another thing for the feds to get involved and take a stance on a moral question. Okay, let's pause there. Any questions on the Wilmot Proviso? So can slavery go to the Mexican cession? The northern answer is no. got some moving parts there. The controversy isn't just yes or no, the controversy are the implications. The federal government's they're not there yet, at least they hadn't been thus far, right? Because again, you have to ask yourself, if you're Southern, where does that leave you? If your federal government is taking an official stance on something like this, right? Okay, then you have the opposite extreme. The Southern view doesn't have a name. I just call it the Calhoun proposal, the Southern proposal. Part of this is predictable, part of it absolutely is not. First of all, Calhoun says the opposite. That's the predictable part. Slavery should be allowed in the new lands. We knew he was going to say that. Calhoun says slavery should be allowed in the new lands. But here's where he surprised a few people. He said allowing it is not good enough. He said, I want it guaranteed. I want a federal law that guarantees the existence of slavery in all new territories. So it's not good enough to allow it, because then you could get rid of it. You could legislate it out. Nope, not good enough. I want a law that guarantees it. That kind of raised some eyebrows around the country. Nobody's really talking like that. I mean, the radicals are, but they're just getting started. As far as mainstream major political figures, nobody's saying things like that. He made his case by, you can see where some of this is coming from. The same kind of thing Southerners have been saying for a generation. Most important, Calhoun pointed to property rights, the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I talk about this in every class. It's Constitution. It's relevant. It's most American citizens, they don't know their amendments, but they know the fifth one. You can plead the fifth, right? I plead the fifth. I'm not answering these questions. Am I going to incriminate myself? Beautiful, fantastic. That's not the whole amendment, though. The Fifth Amendment also says, I think we covered this earlier, but it also says that an American citizen cannot be denied the right to private property without due process of law. In other words, your property is your property. It doesn't matter what crime you committed. It doesn't matter if you've hurt someone's feelings. You can be a jerk. You can do something offensive. You can be a criminal. Your stuff is your stuff. So what's his point? In other words, Calhoun would tell you, not only do I oppose the Wilmot Proviso, I think the Wilmot Proviso would be illegal anyway. Yeah, you both right. So, yeah, they say, look, if you can't take slaves into the next concession, then you're telling American citizens that they cannot take their perfectly legal property into American territory. Because you're offended by what the property is. Does that guy look like he's worried that you're offended? He's not worried, okay? He's not worried. I almost made that, I've been talking about it for years. Almost decided to write a biography of Calhoun, but he's too complicated. I don't want to spend 20 years doing it. I don't have that kind of work ethic. I'll just write Civil War books, those reasons. So, but I've thought about it. Anyway, that's his point. And don't, yeah, the detail is he wants slavery in the territories, fine, but it's more than that. He wants it guaranteed, and he says the Wilmot Proviso would be unconstitutional anyway. Unconstitutional in part because it violates the Fifth Amendment property rights of certain people. He said it would also probably be illegal because you're discriminating against people of certain states. So the states are all supposed to be equal. Are we all equal? If you're telling people from certain states they can legally move west and other people can't, at least with their property. It's the same concept, except instead of applying it to individual citizens, he's applying it to states. It's an interesting point. By the way, it's always good to kind of consider implications of these sorts of statements. Let's say he's right. Let's say he's right, and the proviso would have been illegal. Whatever, just based on his logic. What else would have been illegal?
Anti-slavery laws in the north?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. Certainly 3630 line. Northwest Ordinance that said no slavery north of the Ohio River. At the very least, laws that kept it out of the territories. Maybe the states, although generally slavery was a state-by-state decision. But certainly the territories. So, I mean, if I'm gonna argue that the proviso is illegal, I would have to argue that the 3639 is illegal. By the way, as some of you know, the Supreme Court is going to say exactly that in a few years, that it was illegal, 3639. Okay, Calhoun viewed all of this trying to stop the spread of slavery. He viewed it all as a conspiracy against the South. It's a conspiracy against the South, and in particular against slaveholders as a minority. It's funny, that's one of the ways we study Calhoun. I've got a whole unit on Calhoun. I did a biography class years ago, did a whole unit on Calhoun. It sounds funny, but one of the ways Calhoun is often studied, as weird as it sounds, is as a champion of minority rights. That sounds weird, 2024, to talk about Calhoun supporting minorities. Not that kind of minority. A numerical minority in a democratic republic. Calhoun's point, and it's an interesting one, he says, just because we're the numerical minority, does that mean we have no rights? Is it as simple as getting outvoted on everything? Have we no say at all? In other words, now you're seeing a difference that's going to come up again here in a minute. Some people are going to point out, are we really arguing about slavery going to the desert? Are we really going to have that argument? Calhoun says, yes. Because it's not about where it can go and where it might flourish and where it won't. Calhoun, by this point, is saying it's about the principle. You will not tell me where we can take it and where we can't. It doesn't matter if it would be successful there. That's not the point. The point is you don't have the authority to tell us we can't go there. Right. The way Calhoun looks at this is, again, it's not only a moral issue, but it's also an attack on the South. And so Calhoun feels like he can't afford to lose this one. This is good stuff. I brought some of here. Calhoun's last speech, very famous. He dies in 1850. His last speech is delivered in 1850. In fact, he's so sick, he didn't deliver the speech himself. He wrote it, and they had a colleague read it. And there's a famous painting of it somewhere. I should have got looking like that, but worse. He's literally about to die. He's in Congress in a chair, and he's like wrapped up in a blanket, and he's just staring at all these Northerners while they read the speech.
Is that how he was looking at it?
I would think. You know what they called him?
What?
All these guys have nicknames. He was called the Cast Iron Man. If you read his friends and colleagues' words about him, they all say, even the guys, people who really like Calhoun, were friends with him for years and years, they said that's him all the time. He doesn't laugh, he doesn't joke. He talks about history and government and what needs to be done. And that is all the time. Right? The funny thing about his speech, he can see what's coming. And in 1850, he issues a warning to the North. So here, I just took some excerpts. Here's one thing he says. He says the Union, he means the Union in general, not Union as in Civil War of the United States. The Union cannot be saved by eulogies on the Union, however splendid or numerous. The cry of Union, Union, glorious Union can no more prevent disunion than the cry of health, health, glorious health on the part of a physician can save a dying patient. How can the Union be saved? There is but one way by which it can with certainty, and that is by a full and final settlement on the principle of justice of all the questions at issue between the two sections. And now he looks directly at the Northerners. He says, if you who represent the stronger portion cannot agree to settle them, the questions, on the broad principle of justice and duty, say so. And let the states we both represent agree to separate and part in peace. If you are unwilling we should part in peace, tell us so, and we shall know what to do when you reduce the question to submission or resistance. What's that mean? What's he telling them? That's about one of the most dramatic speeches in the history of Congress. What's he saying?
Either peaceful divorce or war.
Yeah. he's telling them 11 years before the Civil War, he's saying, look, this is who we are. You don't have to like it. We're not changing. You know who we are. You know what we want. You can either work out a deal where we both get to live the way we see fit, or if you don't want to compromise, let us know. We'll hit the road. And then this is something Jefferson Davis for the Confederacy will echo 11 years later. Calhoun says, we can go peacefully. You don't want it to be peaceful? Well, that's on you then. Right? But there's a great line there at the end. We shall know what to do when you reduce the question to submission or resistance. That's not the kind of guy who's going to submit. It's not going to happen. Right? I mean, he submitted to tuberculosis.
It can work.
But it was a southern strain of tuberculosis, I bet. The northern one wouldn't hurt him, I bet. It's too weak, it's not strong. Okay, so you got your northern view, Wilmot Proviso. Again, not just no slavery, you gotta know all those other parts too. And the Calhoun view, again, not just yes slavery, don't allow it, guarantee it, constitutional questions, and also this is very much his line in the sand. He's done. I think I described this one time in a presentation that speech is his last middle finger to the northern people on his way to death. It's just one last. There you go. All right. Of course, there is another option, and it's portrayed as kind of the middle of the road compromise option. And this is a term you're going to get tired of hearing because it's not going to go away. It's going to keep coming up for the next few weeks. And that term is popular sovereignty. Don't overthink this one. It gets complicated, but the concept is the basic concept. The question is, can slavery go to the new territories? Popular, of course, means the people. Sovereignty, we've covered that. Sovereign is the highest authority in a given situation. Who's in charge? Who has the power? So what does popular sovereignty mean?
Let the people of the territories vote on the issue.
Yeah. Let the people who move to the territories in question vote on the issue. Should there be slavery in the Mexican Cession? Let the people who move to the Mexican Cession vote on it. We're going to get more into that as we go. In fact, here on the next slide, it's going to come up again. Okay, fine, fair enough. Makes a certain amount of sense in theory. The problem with it is it won't work. At least at this stage. It might have worked earlier in American history, that's debatable. It won't work now. Not so much with the Mexican Cession. They're going to use it in the Mexican Cession. We'll see that. I don't think we'll get to it today, we'll get to it next time. They are going to use it in the Mexican Cession. But it doesn't really matter because there's almost no one there. They're going to use it in another place where there are people and where the population is growing rapidly, and that is not going to go well. A place called Kansas. Now that's several years down the road when it's going to happen. This is why I say it won't work. I always phrase it this way. By this stage, it's too important to too many people to solve it with a popular vote. You can't solve everything with just a vote. It's too important to too many people. Slavery in the territories. Just settle with a popular vote. What do I mean it's too important to too many people? What I mean is neither side is willing to lose. Not willing to lose, you're willing to do whatever you have to do to win. It's not going to happen in the Mexican Cession because nobody cares. It's going to happen in Kansas. And we'll cover that in a lot of detail. You'll read it in excruciating detail in one of your last books. There'll be some cheating, some good old-fashioned American cheating, some good old-fashioned election fraud, good old-fashioned voter intimidation, and then eventually, well, quite a lot of murder, right? Because neither side is willing to lose. So the proponents of popular sovereignty, as we're about to see, presented it as basically democracy in action. What could be more democratic than letting the residents decide? And in theory, they're right, they are. Problem is, neither side's willing to go for that.
What?
Unless they win. Because if they win, it was a brilliant idea. Okay, questions on that? Yeah.
Can you say again what specifically Calhoun's proposal was? I don't think I remember.
Calhoun specifically said not only should slavery be allowed, it should be guaranteed. And here again, he's 10 years ahead, if you want to call that ahead. In 1860, the Southern Democrats will make that a plank in their presidential platform. They'll call it a federal slave code when they're running against Lincoln. They'll say, we want a law that not only allows but mandates, guarantees slavery. So, whatever else we can say about Calhoun, he's 10 years ahead of almost everybody. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, there's your Missouri, kind of where we are up to this point. Of course, all that's about to change. Okay, well, that's stupid things in the way. That's the presidential election of 1848. I cover this in this class. I don't think I covered it in any other class. I know I don't at the lower level. I don't in Civil War. But I covered it in here. I think it's worthy of our time here. 1848, yeah. Remember, the U.S.-Mexican War is 46 to 48, so this is the first election after the Mexican War. And remember also, you know, Polk having been elected in 44, Polk said from the beginning he'd serve only one term, and he honored that. So this is a pretty wide open race. Is it a super famous election? No, it's not. Not at all. It's barely mentioned in a lot of American history textbooks, but in a class like this, studying this narrow time frame, it's worth our time. As far as kind of overview, the main theme of the election, well, probably the best way to put it if you're looking for a theme is that both of the two major parties are going to go out of their way to avoid the issue. They're going to duck it. They're going to try to keep, both the Democrats and the Whigs are going to try to keep from having to take a hardline stance on whether slavery should go to the next concession, the new territories. What we're going to see, though, is kind of interesting, is they each have a different strategy for how to avoid the issue. You might say indirectly, now this is cheating with hindsight. Indirectly, the election of 48 is going to help set up the compromise of 1850. They don't know that. It's going to take the death of somebody to do it, but it indirectly helps set up the compromise of 1850. But more important, again, the theme is avoiding slavery by the two major parties, and the two major parties each have their own strategy for how to avoid it. The other thing to remember on the overview, and then we'll look at the candidates. Remember, we're still at the point where there are Democrats and Whigs all over the country. It's not that the Democrats are only in the South. They're stronger in the South, but they're in the North too. The Whigs are stronger in the North, but there are lots of Southern Whigs too. So we're not yet at a time when we say, oh, Southerners are definitely going to vote this way and Northerners definitely not. We're headed there, unfortunately. But we're not there yet. So parties are not yet defined by section. And by the way, that's why the parties are so careful, shall we say, to duck the issue. Right? Let's start with the Democrats. They nominated the guy in the top picture there, Lewis Cass. He's a senator from Michigan. Lewis Cass is really known for only one thing in history, to be honest with you. He was one of the earliest advocates of popular sovereignty. And that's his position. So the Democrats' way of trying not to alienate people on the slavery question is to use popular sovereignty. Now the thing is, Cass, he advocated popular sovereignty, but he was always very vague as to just exactly the nuts and bolts of how would this work. We knew, okay, you leave it up to the territories. Yeah, but how? How would you do that? When will they vote? Right? As a territory, as a state, in the state constitution? never really committed, and that, I think, quite clearly is on purpose. Now, here's the thing, the spin on popular sovereignty. I don't mean to suggest they're lying when I say spin, but it's an interesting point. Remember, there are Democrats north and south. If I'm a Democrat and I'm supporting Cass, here's how I spin this to a northern audience. I say, employing popular sovereignty is a way to keep slavery out of the territories. If you're an activist of one level or another, or you just don't want to see slavery spread, that's hardly an activist. All you have to do is use the tools that the system provides, in this case, a popular vote in a democratic republic. Don't want slavery there, win the election. If I'm speaking to my southern brethren who are also in the party, I say something similar. All you gotta do is win the election, but with the southerners, I spin it just a little bit different. Yes, I say if you want slavery there, just win the election, but I also say this. This is an example of what they like to call non-interference. Democrats are going to do the same thing in 56, as we'll see later. In other words, they say this is a great example of a policy where the government is staying out of your life. The government's not telling you what to do. A lot of Southern good old boys like to hear that. The federal government's not going to tell me what to do. So Cass says exactly. It's not up to the federal government. It's up to the settlers. Go to the polls, play within the rules, win the election. You're telling them the same thing, it's just you're appealing to a northerner sense of trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. You're appealing to a southerner sense of trying to keep the federal government out of their business. Right? Okay, on the other side, the Whigs, of course, resort to the familiar strategy of when in doubt. So the Whigs nominated the guy in the middle picture there, General Zachary Taylor. Taylor's an interesting guy. He's a hero from the Mexican War, one of the two main U.S. generals. We'll see the other one next week. Taylor's one of the two great American heroes of the Mexican War. He's an interesting candidate in the sense that one thing he was, what made him a good candidate, other than being a military hero, is that he has basically no political record whatsoever. I don't even mean like Jackson, no record, I mean like nothing. Taylor's never been a politician. Jackson was a war hero, common man, etc., but had held a position here or there. Taylor's a military guy, that's all he is. He had no political record. Nobody really knew what the guy stood for. In fact, as the popular account says, he had never even voted. There was a Southerner, a slave owner, rather large slave holder, by the way, owned more than one plantation. So you say, well, wait a minute, if you're if you're trying to duck the issue, why do you nominate a rather famous, rather large slaveholder? Well, it's because Taylor was always very vague on the question of slavery expansion. Is he pro-slavery? Yeah, but he wasn't really aggressive about it. His issue was preserving the Union. I'm going to talk about his position more in a minute. But he just didn't really have patience for all these abstract debates. This one in particular. He was kind of losing patience with both sides, Taylor. Taylor said, yeah, look, I'm Southerner, I'm a slave owner, fine. But he said, I'm not going to campaign on that. And he said, by the way, we're ripping the country in half to debate whether slavery can go to the desert. We're really going to do that? Preserving the Union. In other words, he's a guy like Taylor is less concerned about can slavery go to the Mexican concession than he is about the fact that the country's ripping in half over an abstract question. it's funny, he used to be, well, at least kind of, people always kind of made fun of him, he wasn't very articulate. That doesn't make you stupid. Stupid and inarticulate are not the same thing. He wasn't the most articulate guy in the world, but he wasn't an idiot. He was just very practical. He's a very practical, real world kind of guy who happens to be running for president at a time when everybody's talking about theory. So he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. And he's in the way of compromise, as it turns out. Of course, he's going to die, so that'll open the door. But they didn't know that yet, right? So yeah, he's ignoring the slavery issue, and the Whigs in general just don't talk about it. So the Whigs get around it by just acting like it's not there. Democrats get around it by saying, I don't know, let the people who move their pick. Interesting thing about this election, though, you have a third party. Now they have no chance to win, but they have a better showing than you might guess. And they're called the Free Soil Party. This is interesting. I'd say it's a little maybe predictable. What happened with the Free Soilers, as they were called, is there were some. It's a coalition. It's different groups coming together, right? So you have some northern Whigs who really they didn't like Taylor's background. You know, he's a Southerner, born in Virginia, spent a lot of his life in Kentucky. He owns a plantation in Mississippi. They're like, yeah, that's not what we're looking for, the northern Whigs. So some of them are unhappy. They end up aligning with some northern Democrats. Because some of the northern Democrats are unhappy that their party's not taking a stand. Now, this is not most people, to be sure. These are minorities within the two parties. So you've got northern Whigs who don't like Taylor being a large slaveholder. You've got some northern Democrats who are unhappy with kind of the waffling and ducking and dodging of their own party. And of course you have some people who are just legitimately, genuinely anti-slavery. So they look at this and they say, well, it's time to keep slavery out of the new territories. And they're losing respect for both major parties. We'll touch on this, if not next week, the week after, how fast we go. You may have noticed this, in all the elections we've covered, you've never once heard me say either of the two parties taking a stand on slavery, because they never did up to this point. So there are people losing patience with that. So they form their own third party, which they call the Free Soil Party. Their slogan, free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. All right. Free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. We alluded to this the other day, so I think you know what's coming here. Well, before we look at their motives, I guess I haven't said their candidate. Their candidate of all people, talk about a curveball, is Martin Van Buren.
Still alive.
Only just. Yeah, he's still around. Yeah. One of these days, I'm just gonna do my hair like that. I'm just gonna surrender. I can totally do that. I can totally.
You get into jobs too.
Yes, absolutely. That is bold right there. That's a choice.
Next week.
I'm gonna need a little more time than that. At least for the chops. I could fake the other part, I guess. All right. Yeah. So yeah, Van Buren, you know, one of the founders of the Democratic Party. He had been Jackson's right arm, right? Jackson's right-hand man all those years. From what we can tell, two things seem to explain this. One is Van Buren had kind of come around to free soil views. That is to say, he didn't want to see slavery spread. Yes, he was a Democrat. Yes, he was an ally of Jackson's all those years. He's also a New Yorker. He's from New York. So it stands to reason, and it's not really shocking he would become kind of in the free soil ideology. So nobody has ever in the history of the world said Martin Van Buren was some great big anti-slavery activist. But he's on the record as having said he doesn't want to see it spread. The other thing that a lot of people say is he switches to the Free Soilers, at least in part because he's still bitter and angry with the Democrats because they didn't nominate him for 44. He was supposed to run against Clay and all that stuff. He was embarrassed. He thought he would be nominated again, having been president before, having been a creator of the party, having been Jackson's right-hand man. He thought he would be nominated.
What year was that?
That was 44. Remember, Polk did the whole expansion thing. Now, the motives of the Free Soilers, I think you already know all this. We kind of tied it all together. If you put together those groups, we talk about the coalition, some Northern Whigs, some Northern Democrats, some people are just plain anti-slavery. Well, that's pretty clearly the majority of the Free Soilers are just genuinely, they don't want to see slavery in the new territories. Well, that's easy enough. They are called the Free Soilers. But there are other things going on, right? We alluded to this the other day. Who are the other kinds of people who join the Free Soil Party? Abolitionists would join, yep, because they don't want to see slavery spread. Well, some of them would join, yeah, they would join. They would, but there's so few at this point. But that's true, you're right.
Democrats who don't like Lewis cast.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. I put them in that coalition though. They were people who didn't like Cass being so wishy-washy. You guys are too nice. Who are the other people that join the Free Civil Party? Who want to keep the new territories free?
People who don't like black people.
Yes.
And then-
A lot of people who said, if there's no slavery in the territories, you know who won't live in the territories? Yeah. In other words, I tell y'all this all the time, and politics can get super weird every once in a while. And it happens in our own lifetime. Occasionally, you'll see these two groups who disagree on 97 things, 97 out of 100, randomly out of nowhere, they're on the same page for something. Well, in the Free Soil Party, yes, to be fair to them, most of them are genuine critics of slavery, don't want to see it spread. But there are other people who said, I would love for all the new territories to be only white folks. No slavery, no black folks. That's an interesting alliance. So you have those who want to keep slavery out of the territories for genuine anti-slavery views, and you have them for genuinely racist views. There's another motivation too. I don't know if you thought about this. Another motivation for some people to support the Free Soul movement is just plain economic. Just good old economics, because there were a lot of people, and this will happen again with Kansas later. There are a lot of people who said, I don't care one way or other about slavery or slaves. All I know is if there's no slavery in these territories, then the land won't cost as much, because the planters can't drive up the price. I can afford a small homestead, and I don't have to compete with plantation slave labor. I'm a small farmer, I'll compete with other small farmers. Free Soil Party is fascinating. It's not as simple as they're the good guys because they don't like slavery. Some of them fit that. Some of them just don't want to compete with slave labor, and some of them just don't want black folks in their territories.
Well, but if slavery was still outlawed, couldn't free blacks still move there? So
They could, and some would. There's a movement of free blacks who moved to Kansas. They're called the Exodusters. That happens later, but they could, yeah. But again, you're talking about so few. It's very, very few. There are areas in the South with fairly sizable free black populations at this point, but it's places like Eastern Virginia, Eastern Maryland, Southern Louisiana. They're nowhere near these territories. And as we know from the Campbell book, some of the southern states have outlawed free blacks. So a good many of them have moved north already, as they would do in huge numbers later. Right after the war, we have what's called the Second Great Migration, right? The first Great Migration in American history is the 1630s, Puritan colonies and all that stuff. Second Great Migration is the migration of many, many, many southern blacks moving in northern cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. That's all very real, but it's all way later. Okay, the results, pretty sure you know who won. That's Zachary Taylor. Let's look at the results a little bit. We don't do this on every election. I think it's worthy of our time on this one. So he wins the election, but it's pretty close. I'll show you the numbers here, and I'll show you the map. I like to show this map. Because one thing jumps out right away. For an election in the mid-19th century, this is borderline shocking. There's no sectional pattern to the vote. They won the same number of states. Popular vote's close. Electoral vote, not terribly close, but it's not a landslide. By the way, look what, Van Buren, of course, didn't win any states, not winning states as a third party. He got 10% of the popular vote. That's meaningful. It's not life-altering, but 10%, 1 of every 10 voters picked the Free Soilers. Pretty meaningful. I think the bigger point is you look at the map, there's no obvious pattern. It's not like all Southerners went one way and all Northerners went the other, nor anything even close to that. Nothing even close. Here's an interesting question. Historians argue with each other. I guess I can get your thoughts on it. Your opinion is as good as anybody else's. The Free Soil Party obviously is, at least in theory, taking a few votes away from each side. Most people argue they hurt the Democrats more. Why do you think that is? And I don't know if that's right.
Van Buren was one of the that started the Democrat.
Could be, maybe a little bit of loyalty to him. Could be. I think it's more about the Whigs didn't take a stand at all. So it's sort of that old Jackson thing, how can you disagree with me if you don't want to think? So the Democrats at least had a policy. If you're genuinely Free Soiler for whatever reason, but you're genuinely wanting to exclude slavery from the territories, you could be annoyed with the Whigs, but there's nothing in their policy that alienates you because there is no policy. The Democrats have committed to popular sovereignty. So if I'm a genuine Free Soiler, then I'm probably at least moderately more annoyed with the Democrats because that's their solution. And if I'm truly anti-slavery, then that's not a solution at all. If I'm genuinely anti-slavery, I don't like popular sovereignty. It's not a good enough answer. Okay. Now, some of you may know what's coming here. Well, you definitely know because it's on screen. Taylor, as we had said, Taylor just really didn't have any patience for all this theory, all this debating back and forth. There was a huge compromise proposal in the works. We will talk about it. I covered every semester in every class called Compromise of 1850. We'll get there where they tie all this together. Well, they were having trouble getting it through Congress because they're arguing about 27 different things. And Taylor wouldn't support it. Taylor just said the whole thing is ridiculous. North and South is at each other's throats. You're threatening the security and safety of our country because of this abstract, theoretical, ridiculous debate. And then he died. You may have seen how he died. In the summer of 1850, I think it was July 4th. They had a ceremony dedicating the Washington Monument. As president, he went out to this thing. Again, it's July 4th, so it's 8,000 or 9,000 degrees. And I don't know if you've ever been in the Mid-Atlantic area, the DC area in summertime, but it's disgusting. The humidity is ridiculous. It's a very, very nasty place to be. But he's Zachary Taylor. He's president. He's got to be there. He went in full military uniform, totally decked out. Got crazy overheated. Went back to the White House afterward, far as we know, the traditional account, nobody really disputes this part. To cool off, he had a bunch of milk and frozen cherries. Never had that particular craving, but there you go. Apparently that's it's a super neat thing to eat. Milk and frozen cherries. He got some kind of gastrointestinal infection and he died. Okay. Now he found himself center stage, not in the last few years, but what was it, 10, 12 years ago? I'd have to look it up. Some wackadoodle somewhere decided that he had been murdered. And this idiot convinced enough important people that they needed to do a DNA test on Zachary Taylor's remains. And they did it. Well, this guy's claiming he'd been poisoned.
But then when he's been dead for 100 years.
I don't know, I mean, I guess it'd be worthy knowing if your president murdered, but that's all I know. But he claimed he'd been poisoned. Arsenic or whatever. Nope. They tested the guy's remains. Turns out, yep, he died exactly like we always said he did. Frozen cherries. You know how you do. I have never in my life had frozen. I didn't even know you could do that. But apparently you can.
Now we all know we cannot mix frozen cherries with milk.
I don't believe it would.
Yeah.
I guess you can. I'm sure he's done it before. Probably a bad bunch of cherries. One would think.
Say better cherries or the milk was bad.
I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of gross. It's pretty disgusting. Anyway, so why it matters? Rather insensitive thing. Why does it matter the guy died? Unless you're in his family, here's why it mattered that he died. As I said, he had been blocking the compromise. His replacement, as vice president, is a guy named Millard Fillmore. They were kind of an odd couple. Fillmore was everything Taylor wasn't. Fillmore's a northerner, he's a politician, he's from New York. Fillmore favored compromise. So Taylor's death, see a difference in those two chaps? I don't know. By the way, this isn't me stacking the deck. Those are their two official White House portraits. So that's not even me cherry picking the sources. See what I did there?
Is that the only president to have his official portrait being him in military uniform?
I'd have to check. Washington's might be, but I don't know that.
Eisenhower?
I feel like it is.
Eisenhower might.
Grant?
No, Grant's just like a suit. He's sitting down on that chair.
Yeah. I mean, they all have portraits, but they all have these official ones. Yeah. I just like the contrast. Yeah. By the way, what's his nickname? They all have nicknames, almost all of them. Old, rough, and ready.
No, Eisenhower's he's wearing a suit.
Is it an official one? No.
Like a gray suit.
He looks like he's like 4 feet tall.
Just the way he's standing.
I know he looks like.
Yeah, he looks like he wishes he was back in the military instead of being president.
Taylor's portrait makes him just giant.
It's probably because he's closer. Maybe it's closer.
We're analyzing art today.
This is Art Appreciation Day. Yeah.
You should take class and every week you have to analyze an art paper about the official White House.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Okay, a couple of big picture comments and we'll wrap this up. So again, they're gonna pass something. I'm gonna cover it next time. It's not the next thing we're gonna cover. We're gonna cover something else. Then we'll cover the Compromise of 1850. And Taylor's death opens the door for that. I would say just a big picture point here. The popularity of the Wilmot Proviso, even though it's not everybody, popular in the North, and the surprising showing of the Free Soilers made the Southern people increasingly demand that their leaders do something. That's a valid point. It's a valid thing to consider. The Southerners are looking around saying, wait a minute. Wilmot Proviso didn't pass, but a clear majority of Northerners eventually are on board with it. plus this random third party that came out of nowhere did get 10% of the vote. So Southerners are increasingly saying, look, our leadership needs to do something. We need to step up, you need to get unified, you need to figure out what we're gonna do. And here's where this is leading. I'm gonna cover it today, but I wanna show you. I don't cover this in any other class, except my old South class. This is what we're gonna start with next time. I'm not gonna do it now, just foreshadow. This thing called the Nashville Convention in 1850. It comes up in your readings, especially in the Fire Eaters book. Some of those guys were there. This is a meeting most Americans are not aware of, which is sort of weird because it's a pretty big deal. This is a bunch of Southerners who come together, obviously in Nashville, and they're talking about their issues. And the moderates end up winning out, but there's a substantial radical presence. And when they meet again, the radicals are in charge. And they're saying things that are a good 10 or 11 years ahead of everybody else. So it's actually a pretty meaningful gathering. All right. Okay, questions so far? I could probably do that in 15 minutes, but I don't want to rush it. Let me get your test back. So a couple things on these real quick. None of this will surprise you. You know how all this works. Your book test is just tucked into this one or vice versa, whatever. They're both in here. The grades overall are fine, no big deal. Everybody did at least okay. I will say, just so nobody freaks out when you see it, a few people a little lower than you're used to, but it's not the end of the world. Nobody did horribly. Another thing that became pretty clear on the multiple choice on this second one, some people missed clumps of, like, chunks. Questions in a row. Right? Like you were doing fine, and then bam, like machine gun fire on the Eastern Front in World War II. Which suggests to me that either you missed a day or you zoned out a day, because you did well on everything else. And so if you're going along, because the questions are in the order I have. So if you're going along and you're doing fine, and then suddenly you miss like 6 out of 8, not a coincidence, right? Otherwise, everything's fine. So they're tucked inside there. Check my math, make sure I did them right. All the stuff I always tell you. But when you get yours, you can take off if you want to. And I'll try to get your fire unit security